Hey folks, Brian Bledsoe again for Red Summit Rangeland Insurance. Just wanted to give you a heads up as far as what the forecast is looking like, and we'll kind of do these monthly updates over the next several months to just kind of set the table and show you kind of not only where we've been as far as the weather is concerned, but also where we're headed. So let's get down to business here and show you what the past 30 days has looked like. And obviously after a blockbuster December here across parts of California, the Pacific Northwest, you do notice some dry pockets here over the past 30 days. So remember, this is the heart of the wet season for a lot of the West. So when you miss out on an extended period of that wet season, it doesn't take too long to get a deficit going. So we're still doing okay for the most part in places, but the problem is that the pattern is not breaking down that has led to this dry January, and I don't see that changing a whole lot, as I'll show you here in just a little bit. Overall, the La Niña is still ongoing here. That's where the blue shading is here across the central and eastern Pacific Ocean. So at this time, it's still working. It's still doing its thing. So is the cold pool up here in the Gulf of Alaska, kind of working in tandem to keep these weather patterns somewhat similar as they have been off and on over the past few months or so. But I do have some changes that you'll want to make note of here, and I want to show those to you right now. This is the sea surface temperature anomaly animation all the way since late October. And you can see early in the animation how expansive the blue was right here. Look at the last few frames. It is shrinking not only in magnitude, but also in size here across the central and eastern Pacific Ocean. And I think that's a sign that the La Niña has peaked and will gradually start to weaken. Now that is at the surface. Let's go beneath the surface here and show you what the temperatures look like, at least the anomalies here beneath the surface. You can see very cold water here, or at least a lot colder than average, at least back in November. But look at this starting to shrink, as I said, in magnitude and in size. And notice the warmer than average water here building across the western part of the Pacific Ocean that is also starting to push its way farther east. Now, will this warm push completely eradicate the cooler than average temperatures right here? Maybe not completely, but it's making a big dent in it. And again, I think that signals at least that the La Niña episode has peaked and it will start to continue to weaken in the coming months. Does it mean it's going to go away like that? Probably not, but at least we're headed in the right direction as far as seeing us kind of get out of here from what it's been causing as far as problems are concerned across a large part of the western United States. Computer models also on board here. You can see they all go right up back here around zero by late spring and during the early part of summer. I actually think the new models that will be updated here in the next day or so will probably show a little bit more of a spike up here toward at least weak El Nino territory during the back part of the summer and as we head toward fall. Remember, this is the second of a double dip here as far as the La Niña episode is concerned. So historically speaking, we usually will follow that up with some sort of an El Nino event, and I think that the groundwork has been laid for that to actually start a little bit later this year. So we have a little ways to go yet, but some changes definitely on the horizon. There's no doubt about that. The next slide basically shows you what we're going to be dealing with over the next couple of weeks or so. So over the next 15 days, notice some pretty stark, drier than average precipitation anomalies out here. Most of California, even up in the Pacific Northwest, ranging anywhere from about 1 to 3 inches below average during that 15-day time period. As I said, the heart of the wet season, so if you go for an extended period of time where you don't get much, it doesn't take a whole lot of time to gradually start to set you back here. So there's some signs that in February we might see this change just a little bit, but definitely not over the next couple of weeks or so. And you can still see some drier than average anomalies showing up here across a large part of the West. The month of February with our NMME model right here does show that drier than average signal abating here across the northern half of California on up into the Pacific Northwest. It does still show up here Southern California and across most of the southwestern United States, with the most active part of the storm track remaining up here across the northern tier. So again, that's for the month of February. If we go to the month of March, it's pretty much the same story. Drier than average showing up here mostly across far southern California, but even up here across the central part of the state. Wetter than average continues in the Pacific Northwest, but the heart of that dry signal is fairly expansive and continues to be fairly expansive across the desert Southwest on up into the Four Corners states. Let's go to April. And April kind of shows it basically going away here across California, at least the most stout part of the dry signal, and really focuses it a little bit farther to the east across parts of the western high plains and the Four Corner states. So again, that is for April. If we go into May, you can see what's happening here. You see the drier than average signal really start to flex again and make its way farther north. I think that is a sign of what I was talking about with the La Nina episode fading, and then us turning the corner and possibly going into that El Nino episode where that drier than average signal not only reinvigorates across parts of the west, but also reinvigorates and develops a little farther north than where it's been over the past several months or so. As we go to June, it's the same story. Notice where it bullseyes up here across parts of Oregon, northern Nevada, Idaho, parts of the northern Rockies, right down here into parts of Colorado and New Mexico. If we go to July, it's pretty much the same story. Drier than average Pacific Northwest, parts of the northern Rockies, and then bullseye down here across parts of the southern plains. But again, Texas, is historically dry during the month of July and also August, their driest part of the year. So again, you have to take that with a little bit of grain of salt. It's typically dry there. But the good news is, at least from a model standpoint, we may actually get another little burst here during the month of February across the West Coast. This is the Euro seasonal model that's also showing those wetter than average conditions here for central California, northward on up into the Pacific Northwest, parts of the northern Rockies, especially up into Idaho, but notice where it's drier than average across far southern California and extending out into parts of the southern plains. If we go to March, pretty much the same story. The farther north you go, it's wetter than average, far northern California, Pacific Northwest, drier than average here, central and southern California, and then that dry signal expands obviously a little bit farther to the east. If we go to April, it's showing much the same thing as the NMME model did, where we kind of relax that dry signal a little bit across California, but still have to deal with it at least in places, but nothing off the charts dry, which means we might still have some storms coming off the Pacific and at least give us some moisture during the course of the month of April. If we go to May, same story, drier than average here, central, northern California, Pacific Northwest. But as we showed you with the NMME model, that drier than average signal then starts to lift farther north. And notice how it encompasses parts of the northern and central Rockies during the month of May versus Texas starts to show at least a little wetter than average in spots. If we go to June, it's very similar. Wetter than average starting to show up here across parts of Texas and the lower Mississippi River Valley versus farther to the northwest, you're dealing with drier than average conditions in many of the same areas that have been dealing with them for the previous few months or so. I think we have July in here too. Notice drier than average right here in the southern plains. Monsoon moisture shows up here across parts of northern Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and back into Colorado versus, no tip one way or the other out here across California, a little drier than average, northern Rockies, and Pacific Northwest. So both of those models pretty similar in the grand scheme of things when you look at it on the big board. As far as the IRI multi-model is looking at, this is for February, March, and April. Notice that it paints the driest part of California at that time over the far southern tier of the state and extending out of the desert southwest and parts of the southwest high plains. Most of California versus this model tipping toward average and then slightly above average up here in the Pacific Northwest, at least for those 3 months. It doesn't necessarily mean that those 3 months are all going to be like that. We could have one that's wet, one that's dry, one that's in between, but as a whole, that's what it's showing right now. If we go to the next map, that'll show you what April, May, and June looks like. Again, notice the dry signal really starting to flex again here across parts of the Four Corner states and then migrating up here farther northwest, northern Nevada, southern Idaho, and on up into parts of Oregon and perhaps even as far north as southern Washington. So again, some of us are out of the woods in terms of, the La Nina episode, others are not. And then we have the El Nino thing to look forward to later this year and see how that's going to play out. But bottom line, my goal here every month is to kind of lay the groundwork, show you what those models are, show you the changes that are taking place so we can kind of put things in perspective and give us at least a good advanced warning as far as where we're going forward over the next several months or so. If you need to tweet me, you can obviously do that. If you need any other questions answered, obviously you can email me. That is my email address, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I'll see you guys again next month.